Graveyard of the Atlantic kind of has loose boundaries, but it's a geographic area where there are significant shipwrecks that occurred. People don't always understand the importance of the maritime history off North Carolina. There's over 2,000 shipwrecks off the Outer Banks alone. And there are over 5,000 shipwrecks off North Carolina. We consider the boundaries to be between Currituck and Bogue Banks.
Shoals are a challenge for navigation. These shallow areas typically near a coastline, and it's sort of like a submerged dune, a dune field. Along the Outer Banks, we've got several different shoals, shoal systems, if you will. Platte Shoals, Wimble Shoals, Kinnickinnick Shoals, and sort of the pinnacle of it all is Diamond Shoals right off of Cape Hatteras. Very little actually is stationary off of our coast, and so these things are in constant motion through time. Shelley Island was essentially a subaerial portion of the shoal. In other words, it breached the surface. During 2017, we had southwest winds, which likely led to a lot of confluence of those currents. And you could see that shoal forming slowly throughout the winter. It just goes to show that it's a living shoal. We talk about Jockey's Ridge as a living dune. These shoals are no different. They're constantly moving because of currents and waves. So these are a challenge for navigation. You go from fairly deep water to less than 10 feet of water pretty quick along these shoals. And so ships like the Ocean Pursuit didn't quite make it through the inlet and fell prey to the shifting shoals.
The Graveyard of the Atlantic refers to the waters off of, more specifically, Hatteras and Ocracoke, and it is the resting place of well over 2,000 ships and thousands of people, spanning a period of 400 years. I would say the shoals make it one of the most dangerous elements of sailing off the coast here. Now add piracy, warfare, and catastrophic weather, and you've got a pretty miserable combination. USS Huron was the last iron-hulled sailing vessel commissioned by the Navy. It had the most recent appointments, weapon systems, everything else. It was traveling through here and was caught in a disastrous storm. Ran on the shoals, but there was no life-saving stations open. And 90 officers and men perished on that wreck. It caused such public outrage. And they were so close to shore, they could have been rescued. And Congress was forced to recognize that this is a real problem, and that's when they started establishing the life-saving service in 1878. The Monitor was never designed as an ocean-going vessel. It really was designed as a riverine vessel. It was being towed to Beaufort, South Carolina. They get hit by a nor'easter. The Navy had been told, do not jack up the turret. They didn't listen, they jacked it up. It changed the center of balance. Then on top of that, the anchor well was such that it came up into the ship. So every time it came up on a wave and came down, there was a geyser of water was coming up to the anchor well. So pretty soon, the men in the Monitor are up to over their knees in ice water. I mean, this is cold water now. So they start to abandon ship. And they got all but 16 men off the vessel, and they were on their way back to see her, and they were looking for the Red Lantern, and a wave came in, and all of a sudden it simply disappeared. It was gone. It was only found relatively recently in the 1970s. The turret is now up at the Mariners Museum in Newport News, and we'll be having the anchor and a few other artifacts to tell the story of the sinking in this museum. The Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum is dedicated to the interpretation and the study and the preservation of the shipwrecks that are off North Carolina coast, off of Hatteras and Ocracoke. It's also about the cultural history, the maritime culture, which exists on the Outer Banks. So this was a remarkable place, and this museum is focused and dedicated toward the preservation and the interpretation of that history.
The museum was founded on the backs of the people of Hatteras Island. A group of people got together and they decided that they needed to have a museum because there was an opportunity to bring artifacts here from the Monitor. But of course, you've got to have a building where you can safely keep artifacts in a climate-controlled area.
The Park Service came to those local citizens and said, look, we didn't get the Monitor, but that's just one ship in a 4-year period. You have thousands of ships over a 400-year period. What do you say we go ahead and we make a museum here focused on that? And the community rallied to that. And I think that's the important thing to keep in mind here. It was a community effort, it was a family effort, recognizing that their maritime heritage and their history was worth saving. And that's important. And that means that people recognize that we are one of the stewards of the history of maritime North Carolina, and more specifically of the Outer Banks, Hatteras and Ocracoke.
The Graveyard of the Atlantic Museum is an experience. You can come here and you're going to find out about amazing things that occurred here on these little slips of sand that most people don't even know about.